Hello and welcome to Two Wizards and a Mic, where we talk about D&D and make it interesting and stuff, because we're awesome. I am Shane,
I am Andrew.
and of course this episode is brought to you by Cawood Publishing, makers of fine books and stuff, and I'll eventually get around to putting the covers in the graphic. But, one step at a time, everybody.
No rush.
Today, we're talking about what you need to do in order to basically make your table interesting, sexy, awesome, adventurous, inspiring. What would you go
Efficient.
for?
Efficient.
Efficient. Okay.
Yes. Um, yes, we're going to talk about setting up the table. We've talked about a lot of elements of the game to do with the Dungeon Master. So we'll do that today again for the most part about the DM. And then we'll start doing a bunch of episodes about for players. So, and I do have a quick update for the Kickstarter, the Wilderness Monsters of the Wilderness Kickstarter. So the books for most people are going to be arriving, the printed books at our office here in about 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll start shipping right away. However, the UK backers, because of shipping situation to the UK, we used a UK printer, and those books are being printed right now and will start shipping probably in a week or two. So the UK backers will actually get their books first, most of them.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's our news. And then yes, as far as setting up a table, so the best way, the most efficient way to set up your table to play D&D. Now, we're not going to talk about the tables and the people who have money to have a custom built massive table.
Or the ones that have those incredibly large, like, flat screen TVs built into them. I gotta say, I'm not a fan. For a short time, I think that there's definitely some tools out there that are really great for, character building and stuff like that when you're a player. But I have to admit, doing that for a year and a half, definitely there were limits, and I think the same thing applies to DM tables, where sure they could look sexy and you could have like 3D environments of all kinds with smoke and lights and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I kind of find that just gets in the way. But what do you think?
Yeah, I have to agree. We like simple, and we're fans for sure of the pen and paper character sheet on the table. However, yes, there's lots of different kinds of tables, but most tables are not. People aren't going to have a ton of space, so you really need to use the space the best way you can, um, and you want to make sure you have enough room for your DM, because that's the dungeon master really needs some more space, especially if they use a DM screen. Um, I think sometimes it's better to have a lot of the books you might use just off to the side, because you don't really need to have them all the time on the table, um, for the players and the dungeon master. But the DM needs space for their notes, and they need probably space for the dungeon master screen, and then you need space for the players to put the character sheets and again, drinks and food you might leave off to the side if possible. I was actually just realizing this weekend, we just the West of the Wood group, with Shane and a few people, we played on Sunday, and I was realizing I'm going to have to change the table when we do finally play in person again, because right now I'm using the entire table. And you have to remember that the players need space for their character sheets and their dice. I know we had a couple players in our group. Their dice take up as much space as their character sheet.
I have to say that there have been times where I have had, you really want more space because you realize you're banging into something, or I think there were a couple times where actually, didn't we have a time where we rolled a couple of ones in a row and characters died? And that was because they kept hitting something on the table. I think it was maybe it might have been just like a figure, but yeah,
No,
whatever. But
no.
but definitely there's times where I've done that, and it's kind of funny because over the holidays in December, I got to actually hang out with my family, and we were sitting there, and you're at the big sort of Christmas dinnery thing, and there's always a table off to the side that has whatever's not being passed around at the time.
Mhm.
And while we were doing that, I actually was thinking, I thought, oh yeah, I should get a side table so that when I could actually have a game running, I can actually. So it was a bit weird that I was thinking of D&D while stuffing my face with whatever it was.
Right.
But it definitely, yeah, having stuff off at the side is a really good idea because you DMs will always have that moment where something hits the floor, a book drops, and you hope it's only the book, but
Mhm.
sometimes it takes figures with it, sometimes
Mhm.
it takes the screen with it, so you will kind of want to avoid that. So yeah, I think that's actually probably one of the most important things is not everything needs to be on the table at all times.
No,
So
and you like you say, you want to use the tabletop the best way you can. So if you do have miniatures, um, you need space. If of course, terrain is one option, 3D terrain, and then maps or a battle mat, those kind of things for your table. All those things, if you're going to use them, you need to really figure out the best way to use the table and maybe not having all the drinks on the table. We do have one
yeah,
player in the West of the Wood group whose dice, for 2 or 3 years went everywhere. And we've trained her now that her dice is not they're not flying off miniatures and the DM screen and flying across the floor, which was especially an issue when I had a young kid. When a toddler wandering around or a baby wandering around where there's dice on the floor and nobody wants to step on a D4.
I think I've only done that once, and that
Nobody
was
wants to
I
step on
still memorable.
a four-sided dice. It's worse than Lego.
Yeah, it's
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 not
not
fun,
it's not good.
not fun.
So yeah, so you want to make sure you use the space really well. Then of course, DM screen is an option that still I'd say probably most people use. I showed some examples a few shows we did before. The um, the current official D&D screen, the newest one, uh, has a dragon flying down to a city, I think. That one is such a good job. They do such a good job of putting all the information that you would need, the kind of things you look up all the time on the back of the screen. That's such a good one. And then I showed the one that Cubicle 7, who published Warhammer, they made a spectacular one that is so well built, and it's got a beautiful medieval cover scene. Um, so there's lots of different DM screens, and you also want to make sure if you're the DM, you have your notes about the campaign, notes that I always note things that happen during the adventure, during that night, during that session. Um, and then if you use a laptop or a tablet or phone, you might need that. So again, the dungeon master needs a certain amount of space. And post-it notes are a big favorite of mine because you can put them on the back of the DM screen, and that's what I use for
Yeah.
initiative order. And then you can just erase or you can just cross out the last initiatives, and then you still have lots of room on the notes to do more. Usually, I only use a few post-its for each game. And then, of course, dice. So these days, not like back in the day, people had one set or maybe two sets if they were lucky. Now there are people who have 100 sets, and they bring, yeah,
This is on my desk at all times these days.
yeah. So, yeah, so you bring your dice, and then of course core books, either the basic rules, which you can get for free on the D&D site and print them out, or you can use the player's handbook, the monster manual, and the dungeon master's guide. A lot of players use the player's handbook as well. Um, and then maybe some other official books you might be interested in. There's a few that have different classes and um, in them. And then third-party books, for instance, Cawood Publishing's Monster Series books is one option to have nearby. Those kind of books I always have near the table, but not on the table because I'm not using them all the time. The one I use the most
Yeah.
is usually one of the monster books, either one of ours or the official monster book. And then that one I might keep more on the table, especially if there's a huge battle. Um, yes. And then, of course, there's not only the map that you could have on the table, which could be the scenery. Sometimes they're called battle mats or flip maps or flip maps. There's also maps that you've drawn of for the adventure, ones that you want to show the characters or ones
Yeah.
that you want to keep behind the DM screen. So you want to have those ready as well. Um, and then part of the battle mat, if you have a play mat, part of the routine with that sometimes is flattening it because um, often you have to roll them up. You don't have a place to store it flat. So when I use that, I take out all the books I have and put it on a table and flatten it. I've had a lot of people say, "Oh, you can just get a big piece of plexiglass and lay it down to
No.
flatten it quickly." And I always respond, "I live in Vancouver. Where am I going to keep a huge piece of plexiglass?" And that, of course, was when we were in our condo, but it still takes up a lot of room. Um,
Exactly. Well, one of the best tricks I learned about dealing with battle mats is when, because I have a battle mat and I put it away and it fell off of a shelf and it fell behind something and it bent and then something fell on
right,
top of it and it stayed there for like 6 months and then I was like, "Where's my battle mat? I need it for tomorrow." And I pulled it out. It was all crumpled up. So a trick for those is I actually went online. I was looking around, like how do you actually re-flatten a battle map to the same way? And
right,
yeah, you just take a towel, and you take a sort of like not a thick towel, but like a tea towel kind of thing, and you just iron it, and you can actually iron those things flat again, and it works really
right,
well. I was surprised. Like it may be a faint crease here or there, but really
right.
you can't tell unless you're looking for it. So
Oh, cool.
that saved my battle mat. So quick tip there: get an
Yeah,
iron.
that's a good idea. I didn't hear that before. Yeah, my battle mat story is that when we were moving this summer, my wife found this big long package and she's like, "What's this?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's my backup battle mat in case the other one gets damaged." Because you have to remember to use the right pen on them, which we had an
Yes.
accident on our at our table once. Um, and I think it was when a guest DM was there, I think. Yeah, they used a different pen and it was
I
permanent.
think they use the dry erase when you're supposed to use the wet erase on battle
Exactly.
mats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It depends which kind you have, but usually that's the case. You use the wet
Yeah.
erase. And so I said, "Oh, that's the backup one." And then we're a few days later, we're packing a few more things, and she's like, "What's this long package?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's my other backup battle mat."
It's the backup of the backup.
I didn't
You never
realize
know
I.
when those dry erase pens will strike.
It's possible that I saw that they were still a decent price, and I just decided to buy another one because now they used to only be, I think, 20, $25 Canadian. Now I think
Yeah.
they're 80 or 90 or more all of a sudden.
Yeah. Well, especially the vinyl ones are
Yeah.
just so expensive, and they're just they're fancy, I guess. Um, but they're definitely, especially if you get them with stuff on them. If you have like, oh, this is the water event, this is the
Hmm.
water map, or this is the
Hmm.
cave map, and they're I still like those ones because they do roll up. Where the ones that fold,
Hmm.
uh, over time the fold creases start to
Hmm.
wear, and it just kind of I don't know, they just kind of look weird. Um, and I think in terms of like battle structure, you can have like the ones that you have, which are those sort of tile ones, and I like those ones too. They're a little more resilient
Hmm.
to the wear and tear of playing, which you'd think would not be that serious, but it's serious. Come on,
Yeah.
they get
No,
used
it's
a
true.
lot.
True, especially when your kid gets to use it during the week. Um, yeah, the official Dungeons and Dragons wilderness tiles, their dungeon tiles, their city tiles are really well made. So there were a bunch of those made maybe 10, 20 years ago, and then they published a new set of them a couple of years ago. Those are really good quality, and then they're great flip mats and map tiles from Paizo. Really beautiful ones that you can get. We use a lot of those. Um, those are like two-dimensional maps you could use on the table, and you can use markers with those as well. You also, if you're using miniatures like we do, the dungeon master wants to choose which you make sure you have all your creatures ready. And I sometimes would hide those behind some books just off to the side so the players wouldn't know what's coming, you know? Like, oh, there's a red dragon coming. I'm going to make sure I drink my potion of fire resistance for no reason at all. So I
That is
hide the
true.
miniatures, but I have them nearby. And then the players, of course, either the dungeon master or the players choosing the miniature for their character, for the hero, for the heroes.
Right.
And and then if you're gonna do an online game, like we are right now, you want to make sure that your camera and those kind of things are ready, your tripod. I know that's what I ended up spending some time this weekend doing, was trying to find the right tripod. Um, and of course, we had that classic moment in our game this weekend where your character, your druid, decided to cast what spell? There was a Drider
Oh
coming
yeah, yeah.
towards you, and you cast a spell to block the Drider's progress towards you. And what's the name of that spell, Shane?
Wall of Thorns.
What did you say during the game?
Say Wall of. Oh, I can't remember. I
You
have a
said,
vague.
I cast Wall of Thrones.
Oh, thrones. That's right. That's right. Wall of thrones, and people are like, so it's like a wall of swords that kind of come up and crisscross over each other.
Well,
Oh yeah.
writing about this game all the time, I knew as soon as you said that, because it's just basically you sort of move the letters around slightly. I knew
Yeah.
100% what you were talking about, so immediately said, "Do you mean Wall of Thorns?" Um, which was actually incredibly effective because you blocked the Drider and allowed your party to escape.
Yeah, because we were like, because we had been just, it was, we were trying to go down this tunnel, and we were trying to get to one place, and we got attacked like right away, and pretty much everyone attacked us,
Hmm.
and even the ones that we kind of thought were maybe friendly-ish. And then that happened, and yeah, I just decided, that's it. I've had enough of these guys. I'm gonna do this because we had one other way to go, and we'll see what's down there.
Yeah,
And you said, well, effectively, that has ended the battle. So you
yeah,
can
yeah.
now
That's right.
feel free to roam.
That's right. That's exactly. Yeah, I said right away. Well, combat is over.
Because I mean, that's the thing too, is that you can have players throw that kind of stuff at you, and something else that I haven't thought of in a while are those the plastic spell effect
Hmm.
area of spell effect,
Hmm.
and you also have like wall of ice or wall of
Hmm.
thorns or wall of fire. You have all those sorts of things that you could actually use to kind of, instead of drawing it on the battle map, it's like, okay, well, now there's a wall here, and it's X
Yeah.
number of feet long and stuff like that. So that is those little, I don't know what you call them. Are those
Yeah, spell effects. And kind of my opinion about that has changed over time. I really liked them when they first came out. So these companies, some of the companies that make battle mats and some items, three or two-dimensional items for the table, have made these plastic spell effects that you can lay down on the table. Some of them are useful, like the fireball one is nice and dramatic, and but I think again it's an issue of whether or not it's actually practical. That's why I say all the time that there's lots of good ideas for D&D, but like it's a good idea, but it might not be practical.
Yep.
And the problem with those is storage. And again, it's just more stuff. So I think if you can store them nearby to the table, then it's useful, and it doesn't really take away from the flow. I think that's part of the reason that I like to keep things as simple as possible. Is game flow, I think, is very important. And just like I think these video reviews in sports, we were just talking about how Shane's not a huge fan of anything except Canadian football, but I am a big sports fan. But the video reviews they have now, I think, are just ridiculous because it takes away from the flow of the game. I would rather keep the flow and have mistakes by referees and officials. I don't want to be sitting there like in rugby now. Every time there's a try scored, they many times now you have to sit and wait to see if it was actually a try, and
Right.
instead of being able to cheer like in the moment. And the same with gameplay. I think that whatever you can do to keep gameplay smooth, you need to do. And too much moving around and getting items by the dungeon master, like getting too much getting time spent getting miniatures or getting effects or terrain, too much of that takes away. So I think there's a balance there. And if you're able to store it very close by, it can work. But and maybe part of it is that I'm just older and I don't want to get up and up and back to the table, up and down all game long. Um, that might be part of it as well.
Well, I mean, especially since actually with your new table, I'm assuming that you're further away from all of your Reaper miniatures. So,
Not too far. We actually just the miniatures have actually been on a few journeys. So
oh,
they had to first I had to take them all out of the cabinet because one of the legs broke. So I had to
oh,
take, whatever they are. The collection is quite large, 300 or 400 of them. Had to take them out and then fix the leg and then put them all back. Then we had to move. So I had to take them all out, figure a way to transport them all, and then put them back into the cabinet when we got here. Now we've built a new wall unit, so they've had to be transferred again, but they're not too far and they're organized better now because before I had to reach in behind and try to see where they were. Now they're all in a drawer, so you can pull out the drawer and you can,
nice.
yeah. So it's gone through an evolution over time.
Well, that's kind of cool because eventually you're gonna want to have everything. You want to have a room just walled with shelves for miniatures. You're like, oh yeah, you've run into this creature. Here it is on the table. It's gonna kill you all now, but enjoy.
That would be nice. Yeah, if you just reached up and grabbed Tiamat. Yeah, yeah.
Now, actually, I wanted to comment about the terrain idea because sometimes you do want to have like a 3D thing you're looking at, and
Mhm.
if you're just drawing on a battle mat, sometimes it depends on your mood. But I know that sometimes as a player, you're kind of like, I'm trying to picture this in my head, it's just not working. And then at some point, you have DMs that were able to get a hold of like 3D printed stuff, which is kind of a neat invention for DM playing,
Mhm.
or you're running any game, because then you can have some more 3D stuff that you can sprinkle in a little bit. Um, but I thought it was kind of funny because when we first started playing right after the holidays, you had all these fancy new 3D trees, and set
Mhm.
the camera up, and it's like, okay, we're gonna play now, and you guys are now in a forest, and it was, I think, at that moment that all of us in the Zoom call were like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, where are we? And you're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, so you had actually removed some trees, and then it, eventually showed us where we were. But um, I guess yeah, you have to find that nice balance between what's going to help get people immersed into the adventure
Mhm.
versus there's 75 trees around, I can't see where we're supposed
Yeah.
to go. But at the same time, that kind of helps too, because if you're in like a dense forest, if you have too many things on the thing. But what's sort of your advice for striking that overall balance?
Again, it depends on your setup. I would say for most tables, the most efficient way to do it is if you want to do a fancy setup with a lot of terrain, I would open the night with that. So, and I would try to have that as the main area for the beginning of the game.
Right.
It depends what kind of dungeon master you are too. If you are a railroad dungeon master and you really want to direct the story, which is just one way of playing, then you could keep the characters there somehow. If you're a sandbox, if you like a sandbox game like I do, where the party can do whatever they want, um, then what I would do is, again, I would have the big setup at the beginning of the night, and I would have some other things planned, and would try to organize it so that there was a break where I could take down that big initial setup and then bring in some other pieces.
Right.
Basically, kind of like a play, exactly like a play. So that's what I do right now. Is usually we play for an hour, hour and a half to start, and then there's a break. And in that break, I'll take down that main set unless the players are still there for a while, and then I'll start to bring in something new. But I won't. I don't really have the time to build a really big set again, so I'll kind of scale it down a bit. Again, yeah, and it depends if you're playing online or if you're playing in person too. So, but again, for me, the number one thing is the game flow, and are the players, are they paying attention? Are they invested? And as long as they're invested and they're present, that's the most important thing. And if you can do that with a really big setup, um, where the party stays there the whole for that whole session, then that's great.
And especially since you're gonna be playing on tables and running games on tables that are a variety of different sizes. Like, um, a lot of tables, like kitchen tables, stuff like that, they tend to be a bit thin.
Hmm.
I used to have this oak table that I was just in love with. It had like metal banding on the legs. It just was gorgeous, and but it was huge. Like it had, it was a typical say dining room size table, but it had an extra width to it of maybe like
Hmm.
a foot, and that made a huge difference. And I wish I kept that table. I think it's long gone, um, but yeah. So you have to kind of adapt to those kinds of things. So if you're guest DMing at somebody else's location, you kind of have to play with what you get, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but to go over sort of just a little bit here, just before we close it off, is you've talked about the camera use and for the online stuff,
Hmm.
and I think you at one point actually you have two cameras where
Hmm.
um, you're able to like switch between okay, I'm looking at the desk and or at the table, and then I'm looking at potentially the DM. And
Yeah.
how do you have you actually dealt with adapting to that kind of play?
So what I usually do is I use like you say, two cameras. So the laptop camera on me, on the Dungeon Master, and then I have another camera on a tripod, like just a small little tripod that aims at the table, which is set up as if we were playing in person. So what I do is I open the night with the camera on me, giving the setup, and then I'll use the table camera for everything that happens in that scene and that setup. And then if if something changes or I need to do some theater of the mind for a while, then I'll switch back to the camera on me. So, but most of the night I keep the camera on the table, because we use miniatures and terrain and the setup. And yeah, so and it's worked really well. And again, we have found online gaming a lot more enjoyable than we thought, and we have a lot of fun. However, we would still prefer to be in person.
Yeah, I agree. I agree because the
Yeah.
camera thing is great, and I've only ever done it once, and that was because one of the players had moved to Toronto, and I luckily at the time was playing in my living room, so I had a big, huge TV there, and I thought, you know what, I'll just bring my laptop over, plug it into the TV, put the webcam up on top of the TV, point it at the room, and it actually worked really well.
Yeah.
And because it was weird because you had all these people in the room and then this huge face that was like, my character is now going to do this, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that's a very rare thing that because otherwise it can be too difficult and just it's annoying. It's so much more convenient when you're in the same room and you're actually able to just do everything all at the same time. So
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
now, the last question I have is what are your suggestions about getting from the previous session to the session that is starting? What kind of things do you do? Because you mentioned that you like to take notes at the very end, but do you do anything
Right.
else to remember what happened before?
Well, funnily enough, one of the best things about recording games, whether you just record the audio or you do the record the video as well, which is what we do, and one of our groups, the Old Boys Club, we actually put the games on this YouTube channel. So
Right.
one of the best parts about that is what I always do before the next session is I listen to or watch the last session to make sure I know exactly where what's going on.
Right.
And I also can use either photographs or the video to make sure I know where all the characters are. And the main thing I want to remember usually is what's going on with the non-player characters, especially your companions.
Right.
And So that's one of the really useful things about recording the sessions. And then yeah, I always take notes that I will then review and add to my notes for the next game.
Right.
Um, so a lot of things like if a player has an extra injury, or if there's magic items that you've found but you're not sure what they are, um, those kind of things that are going to carry over into the next game.
Right.
Yeah, those you want to make sure you have some notes about those and make sure you know what the where everybody is in the story.
Exactly, and especially since I know that when you are running a game, that at the very end you tend to take a photograph of the table as well, because there's sometimes where, I mean, you have the luck of maybe the next game you play, you don't change the table or the
Mhm.
map or whatever. But, if you're playing more than one group or running more than one group, you're definitely going to be, oh, well, I'll erase that. But I find that actually really useful because I've done that myself. Like as a player, I've like taken photographs of the tables to kind of remember, to jog my memory of what happened. And
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah, and you
it
can also kind of get a feeling of the tone of the game and the story too if you listen to it again, and that
right.
helps. I think that helps some continuity. You can also listen to the voices you've used for NPCs to make sure they are something like what they were before.
I am terrible at that. It's like, my voice is very different from last week. I know. I don't remember what I did because I haven't listened to the podcast yet. But we can talk about that stuff in more detail at a later time, because podcasting games and doing the video stuff, that becomes even more involved and questionable sometimes, especially with video. It's like, why are we recording this? Is this out of necessity or because we're fulfilling some sort of weird thing about the internet? But But anyway, thank you all for watching. We are trying to keep these short because we want them to be information heavy and not 7 hours long. And because, we have lives too. And I think, he says, looking at his watch and calendar. But don't forget to tell people about the show and do all the stuff that people normally do by subscribing to the channel and clicking like button stuff, because to be honest, we kind of want to know what's going on, because otherwise, what if we talk about something that's you don't care about? So maybe we won't
Yeah,
talk about that.
and you might notice that we don't have comments on YouTube turned on, but we are on
Yes.
Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. You can look for Two Wizards and a Mic on Twitter. You can look for Cawood Publishing and Cawood Publish on Instagram. And soon, I think we'll get Two Wizards and a Mic on Instagram as well.
Yeah, we have our first episode launches next Tuesday, by the way, for the audio version of the show.
Nice.
I've been cleaning up the audio, and I'm almost at the stage where I really like what the audio opening is going to be, which I have to run by Andrew first. But yeah, it's going to be awesome.
Sounds good. And as we said, we'll do more shows for players coming up. We've really concentrated on the Dungeon Master to start. So we'll look at a lot of player focused shows. Uh, we'll probably look at classes and races coming up for a while, and then go back to the Dungeon Master when we talk about gameplay later on.
And that is going to be huge. It's a lot of stuff to go over.
Yeah,
See you all next time.
later.